used to using a microphone. Yeah, I've spent time in New Hartford all my life, and have lived here for 35 years now too, on the property that was my grandfather's. It's now the park, the other acreage. So it's a place ingrained in my memory in many, many ways. I first started coming as a baby almost 90 years ago. And when we came to visit my grandfather, who was living here then, and we'd drive from our home in Schenectady. And no, I don't remember that from that. But what I do remember is this. My grandfather, Rollin Norris, is here in front of his house, which it was his summer home when he first built it, and we'll learn more about that. And then he retired and it became his family, his permanent home. And this really is a story of family, love, and connection to what was a very special place. I chose to take a job in Hartford when I graduated from college so I could be near the family place, which my parents by then were using as a summer home. I remember shortly after starting the job in Hartford, the 1955 flood occurred, and I have vivid memories of that. I mean, I'll never forget what Winston looked like. And we had flood victims from Pine Meadow that came and used the summer home it was winterized because my father and grandfather had lived there. And they used it, they lived there that winter because they were flooded out of their home. The Newtown Park you'll be learning about is on land my grandfather acquired in 1910 so that he could build a summer home there. We'll have more about that later. It was sold to Mason Beakley in 1998, and Mason made considerable changes there. He passed away in 2001, and some years later, his estate leased it to the town for 50 years for use as a town park. My grandparents and father and mother would be absolutely delighted. I had acquired the back acreage on Stubb Hollow in the mid-'80s to build my own home. A few years ago, Dan Jerem told me about the lease for the park and asked me if I would donate some of my back acreage to the park so that it would have an increased potential for views. And as I believe, Dan, there's a certain slope at the back of some of that back acreage that would give more viewing. And I don't know, Dan, are we going to get a viewing tower built sometime?
A tower? Maybe we should cut the trees first.
He had told me, he showed me plans, and he was hoping to have a viewing tower there sometime. It's got a wonderful view from up there, out over the hills northern up to Massachusetts.
Christine would probably show it on GIS.
Pardon?
Right.
Through the Wi-Fi.
Yeah. I was happy to do this, especially since there's a nice old stone wall that runs along the back there in the property that I donated. And my husband's ashes are there, my second husband's ashes. He had always had a dream of driving his Jeep up as far as the stone wall on a woods road we had. And I knew that's where he would love his ashes. And there's a stone there commemorating him. So this will now be part of the town land, which I'm thrilled about. And also another trail, future trail that can run from the park will come down to Stubb Hollow along the edge of my property because they wanted me to donate 30 feet along the edge all the way down so that the parcel that was town land wouldn't be landlocked because the other land is leased. And then as soon as we were getting that approved here at a town meeting, John Burdick spoke up and he said, oh, great, we can have a trail down there. And so we can have a trail from the park all the way down to Stubb Hollow, which could make some nice walking. So in the future, sometime. The hope is a kiosk that Dan took me to see looks like this. This is the one at the new Riverwalk, the Butler Trail along the Riverwalk. And he took me up there to show me that. He said, this is what we're going to be having at all our town parks, is one just on this model. So sometime there will be one up at the park at Beakley Gardens, and I'll have some of these photos that we have a little history to go on that. So that'll be fun to design when that time comes. Now, just where is this park? A couple of miles up Route 219 from town, it looks as if you're reaching the top of the hill. But as you get there, you'll see it goes up some more. And mailbox 367 is on the right. The 3 is missing from the black mailbox. It looks like 67. But, you turn right there, and the old driveway goes up to the park. There's no signage yet for the park, and the new driveway with parking is planned for the future. Any idea on when that's going to happen, Dan? I could needle him, see.
Well, we have the driveway access now, is currently in place, but there's a lot of wetlands along the front, so we're having a hard time getting a consensus on where the new driveway should go.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the other driveway works just fine. It's a grass driveway. It used to be kind of gravelly, but the grass has grown in. And it's beautifully maintained by the town. I have to tell you, they keep it really beautifully mowed. And the guy who does it says he loves working up there. Yeah. But let's start our story at the very top of Town Hill. The first church and meeting house was built here in 1739, and a second one in 1829, a classic example of a Connecticut Congregational Church architecture. It is known as the church that stabbed itself. From the time in 1910, when the steeple was lifted by the wind and snapped off just above the bell. The spire went right through the old roof and lodged in the old balcony. The building was removed in 1929, and only its bell and foundation stones remain as a memorial park. I think it's a funny coincidence that the steeple stabbed the church the same year my grandfather bought his property in town in New Hartford, but that's just one of those things. The church had been abandoned some years before that, as by the mid-1800s, North Village and Nepaug were rapidly growing as industrial centers, and villagers' work was no longer centered on farming up on Town Hill. And they saw no reason to climb all the way up there to go to church. So the churches were established in the two other parts of town. The North Village was, North Congregational Church was one of them, and there was one in Nepaug. The bell is still there today. And one Memorial Day, we have the ceremony up there. We all got a chance to go up and take turns ringing it, so which was fun. Actually, the string is there now, and you could go up and ring it anytime. I was up there taking pictures. I thought, look at that, the string's there. Charlie Anderson of Bakerville told this story to me and asked me to share it with a group gathered for the interment of my father's ashes at the Town Hill Cemetery back in 1998. Charlie is the grandson of the senior Charlie Anderson, who built the summer home Strayfields in 1911. And here's the story that he asked us to tell at the interment. Back in the early 70s, my father, Hosmer Norris, an engineer by trade and inclination, brought to the attention of the Andersons that the bell at the old church foundation at the top of Town Hill, dating to the early 1800s, quote, needed some work. They all met at the site and dug around to see what needed to be done. According to the younger Charlie, kids would try to ring the bell and the yoke got tipped out at an angle. The yoke, which had been made at the old blacksmith shop in Bakerville, had been stressed by this and ultimately broke apart. There was no money available to pay for this renovation, and it turned into quite a collective donation of time, labor, and materials. Paul and Joe Sokolsky of Bakerville Lumber donated the wood for the new yoke. The elder Charlie Anderson made the yoke, and the Follards of Nepaug donated the cement blocks and constructed a new foundation so that it could be put in place. It was all more complicated than originally anticipated, and throughout the process, Hosmer was there regularly checking it out, and I can just see him doing that. After it was completed, thanks to Hosmer's generosity, everybody who had contributed to the effort received an unsolicited check as a donation from him to help cover their costs and labor. This yoke held the bell in place until it was replaced once again in more recent years with more weather-resistant wood that's now available, and that's what you'll see today. So that's got quite a story, bell. And you'll find other things around this structure up there. It's really worth going and poking around, because I didn't know about this one until I ran up there. There's someone one day to take a picture to add to the show, and this gal was up there taking pictures, and she sent me her pictures, and there was this, and I didn't know it was there. And I asked, this is the new Hartford Bicentennial Time Capsule. It was buried in 1997 by the New Hartford Bicentennial Committee to be reopened in 2076 by the Tricentennial Town Committee, assuming there'll be one. Now, I've asked Ann Hall and a couple others if they know what's in this capsule. And Ann said, no, it was before my time. And so, I don't know, does anybody know what's in the time capsule? I'd love to see if someone could find out. Anyway, it's up there. And it'll be, hopefully there'll be a tricentennial committee to open it up. Now, this was another marker I hadn't noticed before until I got these photos from this gal that happened to be there while I was. And I went and walked the 153 feet, and sure enough, that oak tree, which the arrow points to, is the one that they are referring to on this plaque. And it's one that was from a shoot. That's a scion. I looked up the word scion, and it means shoot or root, to be transplanted from grafting from another tree. And that tree was grown from a shoot of the original Chardonnay. It was given to this man in 1965 because of his services to the district at the Connecticut Constitutional Convention of 1965, whatever that was. So anyone would like to search a little more history on that, please do. But anyway, I'd never paid attention to the tree because I didn't know it had any significance. So now when you turn in to look at the bell, you can look at that beautiful big tree right on the corner there. Now, the old Town Hill Cemetery is just beyond the bell, a short distance. And this was founded in 1735. And it's called the Old Burying Place. And there's a very prominent stone there for the Yale family, which you'll be hearing more about. And the Zimbalist family has a huge plot. It's right as you come in from the entrance, so it's right there, and you can really, it just takes over the slope. Of course, we've had so many famous musicians and actors, and then Marcia Davenport was Ephraim's daughter, and my father remembers playing with her. And I have her books, which they're wonderful. If you haven't read them, do. One of them is Valley of Decision, which I still remember. And someone else just told me that one of her books, and I've got to check this out, had a lot of New Hartford. It was all about New Hartford. I don't remember reading that one. I've got to find out what it is. But anyway, she's a fun author. I've enjoyed the books of hers I've read, and her stone is up there. And then the Loomis generation has many stones, and you'll be hearing about that name soon. And then the Revolutionary War soldier. And that's not the only one from a Revolutionary War soldier. Most of them we can't read too well, but this one's been really well maintained. So this one goes back to 1829 was when he died, but he was a Revolutionary lieutenant colonel. So if you haven't been up to the Town Hill Cemetery, do go up. It's beautiful. And it's just a wonderful, fun place to roam around. I took my daughter, my granddaughter from Colorado, who was visiting this summer. And Colorado doesn't have history that goes back like this, other than Native American. And so I just happened to think to take her up here. Oh my gosh, it was the hit of her visit. She couldn't stop talking about it. She'd never seen anything like this. She didn't grow up in New England. So if you have people visiting from out of the area, remember. And this is the Mason and Leisha Beakley plot. And it has a bench and several stones and wonderful little memorabilia about the two of them on the stones. And the one in the middle you'll see, this one here, and the one in the middle you'll see later at the end of the show with a message for you. And these are my family plots, my grandfather, my grandmother, and my parents. The Loomis family this plaque here lists the original pioneers who settled New Hartford in 1734, and this was a lot of what David Krimmel did in his show. And one, Israel Loomis, is the man who received the acreage that became Strayfields, part of which is now our town park. My grandparents and father and mother, I don't believe, ever knew that the history to that way back then, because David's the one who told me this, the very first town meeting in New Hartford was held at the Loomis house on what was my grandfather's property in December of 1738. And you may remember David mentioning, can you picture the people coming by horseback in December to the town hill for a meeting? That's to think back to what it was like in those days. But anyway, you can see, I've underlined his name here. And a lot of these other names you recognize if you look through them. There's a lot of those names still in town. A lot of, There you can see the 1734 map of New Hartford. And there I put an arrow to where it is. That's Town Hill running up and down with the red dots along it. And this is where, this shows the lots that were there by December 38. By 1738, there are quite a few people more that had come out to town, as you could remember some of that history, that first a few came and then they all came out, had to survey, come out by horseback and in the woods and survey all these plots. But you can see here now we have a number of town officials identified on this map. And then the other stone tells the pastors of this church from 1739 to 1854, and that's the year the last one, Cyrus Yale, died that year. And that's about the time the church was becoming no longer very active. Now it happens, the reason that name's important, because Cyrus Yale is the one that built the parsonage, which the family called Eagle Nest. And that building, that's the picture I just took recently. Beautiful big building up there on the very top of Town Hill. And this is the house that my grandfather visited in 1910 to visit his cousin. And his cousin had married Alfred Beadle. And my grandfather had introduced them. So the reason they met was because of him. And Alfred had this place there, and Ellen, and they all came from the Philadelphia area, and he was using this place as a summer home. In fact, I have two of the booklets I'd done on the history back there, and I put a yellow tab in on the noted part that says, Plain Tales from the Hilltop by Albert Beadle. And he wrote this because when Yale, when he died, had left directives that he wanted his family to continue to use the place as a summer home. And it was, for 3/4 of a century, used as a summer home. And Albert has written stories of what the kids did with the animals up there, and they're fun to read. And so all these stories of the fun the family that descended from Cyrus Yale had at the parsonage prior to the time that my grandfather went to visit there and decided he wanted to have some fun on Town Hill. And he said to his cousin, I'd love it here. I wish I could come and have a place where I could sit and look at the view and watch the clouds go by and just relax. And Albert says, well, I happen to have 55 acres down the hill that I've got in settlement of a debt, and I'll sell it to you for $950. So done. And the following year, this is where you can see this one more, where the dot shows the Loomis property and the red dot shows the Yale property on that old map. And that's Albert Beadle's daughter, Betty, who's playing at the parsonage in the 1800s. And I remember her daughter was a cousin of mine, and I remember visiting with her when I was a kid and a young adult. So anyway, let's see what I've got remembered here. The interest of the land that he bought from Albert, was also land that had been in the Loomis family. And if you look at the maps of that day, back in the early 1900s, there was a lot of Loomis farmland still all over that Town Hill part of New Hartford. So that family had a lot of area in this time. I'm going to tell, there's a full circle story I'm going to tell a little quickly here. And that was when Mason Beakley bought the property from my grandfather in 1998. Guess where Mason was living? Guess.
Eagle's Nest.
Yes, the parsonage. So I just think that's one of those fun coincidences that I love. So let's go down the hill. We're going down now from the parsonage and from the bell, and we go down, and we come to the place where it has leveled off, and then it just begins to dip. You can see the sign for the truck there, and the red arrow points into 367. And the first thing we pass is this house that was a Sears Roebuck catalog house. The addition on the left was added on, but that is a Sears Roebuck catalog house. Did any of you know you could build a house from a Sears catalog? Mm-hmm. Does anyone know of any others that they know of?
I have a friend that lives in one in Torrington.
In Torrington? Yeah. Well, what had happened was that it was built in 1930 for Catherine Priest. And someone recently told me when I was talking about this show that she remembered, and she lived in town also all of it through the years, and she could, maybe Betty remembers this too. She was the town librarian, evidently, and also was the manager of the water company. Yeah. And so I learned something new just recently. It's fun when you start digging in, you just keep learning new stuff. And the reason the lot had been broken off to begin with was that my mother's brother, my uncle, lived in South America at the time, and he wanted to have some land that he could have a United States address. So my grandfather broke the land off, so that was his address. Then he moved back to this country, and that's when my grandfather sold the land. So it's the funny little things like that. Okay, as we start up the driveway, you're going to see the things that Mason did. Because this was just a field, and my parents had a vegetable garden in it. And right now when you drive up, it's even lower now than it was when I took this picture 2 or 3 weeks ago from this drought, because earlier this year, the one picture on the right shows what it looked like. Gorgeous, gorgeous pond. And then we continue up the old driveway, which is, as you can see, pretty grassy now. You can just barely see where the tire marks are. And up to where the house once was, and just picture that view is the same view now and then. And look for this big tree. It's right there, you can't miss it. And picture what was behind it when you drive up. We'll learn more about the house in a bit. And that's the side of the house that you would have passed as you came along the driveway. And around the bend in the driveway, you'll see this old garage, which does still stand. This is the front porch, as I remember it, with a grand view north to the hills of Massachusetts. And this is the house when it was first built in what was called Strayfields. Guess why? Do you see anything but Strayfields? This is all abandoned farmland back in 1911 when this was built. And so it's just all open. And then 4 years later, the trees had begun to fill in a bit. Now, the design of the house was my grandmother's doing. She had been to visit a Japanese house in Jackson Park, Chicago. And she loved it and all the openness of it. So she used that idea to design Strayfields with lots of windows and open areas. Now the garage, which is, this is the original garage, that was close to the house, as you can see. Right now, that garage was quite a way further back in the distance from the house, and it was a bigger garage. But this was the first thing that was built in 1911. And my grandfather and family camped there that summer to oversee the construction. My father was only 5 years old. Now, the pond that Mason put in came from a spring down in that field. There's no pond then. And the spring was one that my grandfather, who was an engineer, had a water tank that he pumped the water from the spring into the tank. And then pumped the water from the tank up to the garage to another tank for water to have at the garage while they were camping there, what I call a pumped storage system. Now, guess what? We have a pumped storage system on the Housatonic River. And this is down in New Milford. My grandfather designed this. He was the manager of the United Gas Improvement Company in Philadelphia, and he was an engineer, and he designed the first pumped storage hydroelectric plant in the United States, which is the one at New Milford. The plant pumped water up from the Housatonic River to form Candlewood Lake, where it was stored for use in generating electricity. It continues to operate today, and the lake has long been popular for recreational use. So maybe this pumped storage system that he used to get from the spring at Strayfields up to the garage in New Hartford was maybe the stimulus for him to begin to design something of much bigger magnitude. Now, by 1928, the Strayfields were filling in, and clearing needed to be done to maintain the view. The arrow points to farmland that was not abandoned. So much of the farmland in the early 1900s was abandoned, but this was not. This was the farmland that abutted my grandfather's land and belonged to the Castaways. Hey there, guys, they're in the back row. They're one of the multi-generational families still living on Town Hill. I mean, we really do have a lot of people who go back here. Jim and Sharon live next door to me on Stubb Hollow. And Jim's great-grandparents, Thomas and Justine Castaway, bought the farm property in 1905 from George Jester and moved there with their 4 children. The property extended from Town Hill down to Stubb Hollow, just as my grandfathers ultimately did. I well remember my grandfather visiting with Albert Castaway, one of the children who stayed on at the farm. And now I get to visit with Castaways too. The farm had previously been owned by the Merrill family, one of the town founders. Their name was on that. In fact, there were several Merrills on that stone that was on the side of the library. The Castaways used the fields for hay, corn, potatoes, and had dairy cows and chickens. And Jim told me that this little bit of old woods road that I happened to spot because the dog started walking up it one day, and I said to Jim, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's part of the road that used to be when they used to bring ice down on a horse-drawn bobsled to get ice and go down to get ice in the ponds down in the hollow, and they'd bring it up back to the farm for ice, and that was with the horse-drawn bobsleds going through up there." So anyway, picture that. Jim's mother, Betty, who's back there, still lives on the property along Town Hill Road. That's her house, and she told me it was built in 1850?
In the 1850s, yeah.
Yeah. And this farmland has never been abandoned. It's been farmed right along. I wonder how many others, there aren't too many of those in New Hartford. And right now it's leased to and farmed by the Gressics. So there it is in full glory. Meanwhile, down in our front area there, the mountain laurel thrived. My grandfather's there by one of the beautiful, huge, big bushes. Mountain laurel just really loves it when it gets out in the open. And our view down there has a different look than it does now, because there's no pond. And And the laurel, in this picture you can see, thriving in that front yard in front of those birches in a recent picture, more probably in the 1980s, early 90s. And this is a pastel I painted in 1953. The house with the huge pine trees along the side. And I went down and took a picture just recently. She said, there are those pine trees. Look at them. Same pine trees. They sure are a lot taller now. But the view down in front of those pine trees is certainly a lot different than it was when we were there. And there's that beautiful pond that Mason put in. And he also took down a lot of trees. We'd always kept the view open, but he took down a lot of trees more to broaden the view and make it much wider. And of course, you can see the beautiful maintenance that's being done on the grounds there. Well, in 1920s, this original house had some changes coming. And here you can see the my grandmother outside the kitchen, which was the 3 windows there on a porch. And she wanted to have a place where she could get the a little more space for the living room. So they moved the porch and the kitchen to the back beyond the back of that, and added the dining room, big dining room, living room, to the place where the porch had been. And in those windows, you wouldn't believe this, I could still see it, the hinges on the windowsills. Because the windowsill at the bottom hinged back so both sashes could go down into the wall. Because she wanted to have it open like a Japanese house. Now this is the house as I remember it. My grandfather retired in 1923 and moved to Strayfields full-time in 1930. My grandmother wanted to move the whole house around so they could see the north view to the hills from the living room. But the builder asked her, what should she plan to do about the fireplace and chimney that were pretty permanent in the front of the house, up in the north room? So there was no go on that idea. Instead, she arranged to have the walls moved out 3 feet to create more space in the existing living dining room. It's a 20 by 30 foot room that I remember so well. Let's look back to the one. You can see here how the roof stuck out a whole lot more. And by now, that comes out to the roof. And here they relax by the house with the expanded walls, the house as I remember it. Now, Town Hill was quite an artist colony back in those days. And when my parents started coming, a friend of my grandmother's, Professor Earl Barnes, was already living here. This was one of the places on Town Hill, too, I remember visiting. His wife, Anna, was a writer, and his sons were journalists for the Herald Tribune, one of them being the theater critic. Summer theater productions held at some of the Town Hill homes were popular then. One home even had a little outdoor stage. And we see here a note, this photo, which I found in my collection, had a note on it about this theatrical about 1922. Whoops, here, I thought I had it there, but yeah. Oh, that's what the note was, sorry. I know the notes, but yeah, the note on the back said, C.R. Kennedy's theatrical about 1922. Now, whoops, let's go back again. My father remembered taking part in some of these summer theatrical productions, and this is a playbill for one that was held in the garden at the Rafters, which was the summer home of the well-known musicians Al McGluck and Ephraim Zimpala Sr. You'll see his name, Hosmer Norris with that arrow, and the Barnes name's up there, and Eileen Creevy listed. Now, Eileen Creevy was from another of the several multi-generational families living on Town Hill today. Her granddaughter, Ann Hall, is our town historian, as was Eileen's husband, Newman Hall. Anne is the sixth generation to be living in the large colonial revival home called Esperanza, located next to the parsonage at the top of Town Hill, and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And sometime it'd be fun to get Anne and Dan to do a history of those properties, because they're connected. The old barn there is still in use, and you can see the horses are what are using the barn now. It's called Esperanza Farm. The Jerem Winery was founded on the property in 1988. I forgot there was something missing here. Yeah, one of my text things got disappeared off here. I was just going to go back to Anne's story on her history. Was that she's, of all the 7 generations that have lived at Esperanza, the title holders have been 6 out of 7 of them are women. And Anne's grandfather, Hall.
Jamie.
Yeah, pardon? Jamie, I'm going to say, I keep getting David and all these other, yeah, Jamie Hall was the one man to be the one who holds the title there. And the original land was bought by a well-known writer of Victorian romance novels, somebody by the name of Smith, who was the first one that bought it, and she bought it with her own money. And she first bought the property that is the winery now, and then 2 years later bought the Esperanza property.
Just the house burned down.
Pardon? And then the house
Just the house burned down.
and then she built it again, right?
So she bought the house next door.
Yeah, the house burned down that your family lives in now. Yeah. When was that house built, Dan, the one that you live in now?
It burned in 1870 or 71, and they rebuilt it as a farmer's house.
Yeah.
For the house next door. But they had several properties that carried down through Stuff Hollow, back over through Bruning.
Yeah, right. And Creevy Pond, which you'll see later, is part of that whole. They had extensive holdings, yeah.
I guess 1,000 acres.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Were those properties separated by Pussy Lane back then, or was it rather?
Pussy Lane was Pussy Willow Lane then, and it was. I was going to refer to that. It was called Pussy Willow Lane, and that's what the Esperanza is on one side, and on the other side is the winery. And this is where you see the this building, which is now the wine tasting room, was once the creamery for the dairy farm.
So they've always been divided by that little lane.
Yes. Yeah. And so that building now is used for wine tasting and not for bottling milk, which is what it was. And of course now you have the thriving vineyard there on what had been farmland at one time. The Jerem Winery was founded in 1998 and currently offers 11 wines, including several award winners. And the higher elevation of Town Hill provides a relatively long growing season, enabling production of high-quality wines. And of course, that building's across from the barn on Pussy Lane. Now, when it was changed from Pussy Willow Lane to Pussy Lane, I don't know. But all I know is long ago they stopped trying to have road signs for Pussy Lane. They wouldn't last long. Okay, now back to Strayfields. There's some courting going on. My father, this is allergy season. My father met Betty, my mother, through her brother John, one of his college friends. And when he was courting her, she was a student at Smith College, and he invited her for weekend visits at Strayfields. Another of those fun coincidences. She already knew Eileen Creevy, who was a college classmate. Here's an excerpt from a letter she wrote at the time. Dear Hosmer, I'd love to visit New Hartford next weekend, but I must disillusion you as to my tennis. At present, I play whatever amount I can get in at 7 a.m. when the courts are empty and all possible onlookers are still in bed. Well, tennis was very popular on Town Hill. And this is a picture, 1932 picture on the Parsons Court. Parsons is the building down on one of the big curves on Town Hill. And these are the local ladies from the Parsons, Jones, Gay, and Kelly families. Maybe my mother would get good enough to play with them. My grandfather even had a tennis court built off the lower driveway. And if you look through the woods as you come in opposite the Sears Roebuck house, you could still look through there and you could still see the pavement in there and the posts. I was told by the current owner of the Sears Roebuck house that his kids had learned to ride their bicycles over there on that cracked pavement. So it's still got some use. Here's another letter to my mother, a week later after her visit, her first visit. Dear Hosmer, the weekend couldn't have been better. I don't know when I have met more charming people or so thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's all just strengthened my longing to live away from a city of any considerable size. There's nothing like the country and the hills. Isn't that so? In response to his offer to give her driving lessons when she came in May that year, I hope you have a lot of patience, for I warn you I may be terribly dumb at learning to drive. It will be good for your soul, though. It's the kind of training I get every summer trying to teach some of my young hopefuls how to draw a bow. She taught archery at a summer camp. You just sort of have to set your jaw and bear it. And later on, you can take it out on a tennis ball or a canoe. Well, this is the car that my father taught my mother to drive in. Can you imagine trying to learn to drive on these hills at that time, in the early 1900s of 1931, in a car like that? Anyway, she writes, I hope the driving lessons weren't too much of a strain. Personally, I should think they would be rather wearing, but at least you disguise the fact admirably. As for me, I enjoyed it to the 9th degree. Left turns and backing up hills included. I had no idea it could be quite so much fun, and I couldn't have had a better teacher. So I guess it was a success. Now, I have to tell you that car that you're looking at. My father, get the right page. My father, who had this kind of engineering, well, there's another engineer, he had removed the body from his old Model T and then driven the chassis with its wheels and gas tank to a junkyard where he bought the sedan body from a car whose engine had been destroyed, but the body was still intact. And he had this body bolted on to the old Model T chassis. So here you have the old chassis and the new body. I got kind of a bang out of that story. And my grandfather was often seen driving his Packard touring car around town. Maybe my mother got to drive that one too. My grandfather became very active in town and was on the Board of Finance. And he was also a big baseball fan and avidly supported the New Hartford baseball team. Yes, we had a team in town at that time. And I remember we were talking to Ginny over here, and Betty Castangrave remembers going to those games. And every Sunday afternoon, Betty said that was what you did. Did you know New Hartford had a baseball team? Yeah. So I remember this. I remember going with my grandfather and sitting on the back of his open convertible up on the top there on the back of the seat. And at the 7th inning, he always got up and said to everybody there, okay, it's time for the 7th inning stretch. We have to take the 7th inning stretch. That was his routine for every one of these games. Well, my parents married in 1932 and often visited, coming from their home in Schenectady, New York, where my father was an engineer at General Electric. I was born the following year, and the twins Stott and Dick 2 years after that. So now we got to come for visits too. And there was a lot of posing for family pictures. That's my grandmother on the right there. And my uncle visiting with his young family, and he's the one that introduced my parents. Thank you, Uncle John. Now here my grandmother's, this is a family photo with me and my brother and sister. And that's my grandfather's Cocker Spaniel Wags, who was a very, very adored family member.
Which one's you?
Which one's me? I'm the one on the right in the back.
Okay.
And the boy and the girl are my twin sisters, yeah. Twin sister and brother, yeah. Okay. In 1945, my father was a civilian in uniform being sent to Germany, with the rank of a colonel, in fact, to help dig out and find, this is toward the end of the war, to find all the information they could on German rocketry. So he was away for my birthday that summer. He didn't come back until August. So I wrote a letter to him. I'm so sorry you weren't here for my birthday. Wags met up with a skunk again last night. He smells worse this time. We took Wags to the ice cream store and bought a Skippy cup. It was so cold that he had to wait until it was softer. We went over to Parker's once and climbed trees. We went swimming every day except one. Now Parker was a boy my age, Parker Gay, and he lived in the big house that's across from the driveway at Strayfields now. Another longtime family here. Well, one of our swimming spots was Creevy Pond down on Stubb Hollow, which is, part of this extensive Creevy property. And you know what? That bathhouse is still there today. It's about falling down, but I took those pictures yesterday. and you can picture it once having been I remember dressing in it, but I wouldn't want to do it now. And there were many family gatherings there. This is the place we'll be walking around if we visit up there today. And the place that, looking down on that yard, is mostly brush now. And we had multiple generations coming along. That's my daughter Debbie on the far right, the older girl, the younger one's my other daughter. And Debbie's the one who is now the fourth generation living on my grandfather's property. She built a house next door to me last year. And they loved to play dress up. And the sandbox, oh my gosh, the sandbox was something from one generation to the next. That's my daughter Debbie and my son Leif and his cousins. And then one of their children, for the next generation, sandbox still going. And it was right along the side of the house between the driveway and the house. And we had lots of summer birthdays. And that's my son Leif, who designed the house that I lived in, and you'll hear a little more about that. And that's my daughter Debbie, who lives next door to me now. And then we have my father at his 80th birthday sitting in the dining room at Strayfields. And how about this birthday cake? Look at that, it's an airplane. That's my sister's children. But, and you can see again, you see the garden along the wall there? Right now, the brush has grown out when we go up there. The brush has grown out, so it's about out as far as where Andy is standing behind the cake. And so that you stand there, and I still have trouble picturing, the house is practically up to where the brush is. I keep thinking, wait a minute, where's this yard that was there? Well, it's all covered with brush. And when we go up, I'll point out the stone wall that you can barely see behind all that brush that was where those gardens were. We even had a Christmas gathering one year, and we hear the kids again. We have to have the family posing. You all have families that like to pose for pictures? Yeah. And then we had an outdoor wedding. In June 1982, I married Art Bailey right in front of that same garden stone wall. And we had a string quartet playing on the front porch after the ceremony. It was a beautiful, beautiful day in June. But this chapter is about to close. We had one last multi-generational pose in 1997 with my brother and sister and their husbands and two grandchildren at that point, two great-grandchildren at that point. And we had a cousin come with his guitar, and we sat around and had some music in our wonderful, comfortable living room. And there we are, my parents leaving the house for the very last time in November 1997. My heart still wrenches when I look at that picture. And my parents decided to sell Strayfields about the time as no one in our family could take it over. Another Town Hill family, Dan Jerem and Carlene, his wife, were considering buying it. And they came up for a visit, and my father told them its history, and we taped his account, which I was able to listen to when I was starting to put the story together for the notebook that I have over there. And from it, I had some memories that resurfaced that I'd forgotten from listening to the tape. So thank you, Dan, for having come for the visit. We got to tape the history. By then, Mason's bid on the property was accepted, though, and he became the new owner. And remember the coincidence that Mason was living in the parsonage at the time, the old homestead that led to Strayfields coming into being. My father passed away only 2 months later, and my mother later the following year. So they only lived a very short time without having the wonderful place they loved, which is a blessing in some ways. The next year, Mason Beakley begins work on transforming the front view, and he renamed it North View. He had a lot of work done to expand the view, and of course, got that pond going. He planned to take down the old house and showed me plans for the new one that he planned to build, which was going to wrap around the view. It had, kind of a shape like this to take in that beautiful view, which he had so expanded by that time. But he got busy out of state. And then, of course, he died in 2001, and the property just lay unused. So changes are coming. Here's a picture long ago of that yard outside the main part of the house, the living room part of the house, with the gardens and the stone wall, and the yard beyond, which is where we used to play croquet and hang out. And already by 2003, you can see the same edge of the house, looking out at the same view, and look at already by 5 years, that's how much had grown up in that time. The arrow points, if you look very, very carefully, there's some little pink blossoms there that you barely see, and they're still trying to make it. And this upper lawn is quickly becoming woods, no longer a place to sit in the sun. The days of croquet are long over. This is how it looks today. And the stone wall is a massive brush. I have put some little markers up there to kind of show you where it is. There's not quite so many leaves now. It's a little easier to see through to see where the stone wall is, but I can't get over how much grass and stuff has grown for where it isn't maintained. Nature does like to nature abhors a vacuum. Those little flowers peek through though. This was the stone wall when it was first built, and the garden tended. And here at last, I took this in the spring before the foliage, and that's where you can really still see the stone wall when there's no foliage there. And here's my kids and their spouses working like mad in 1991 to rebuild the stone wall. They decided it was time to really give it a new life. For what purpose? To grow a brush in front of eventually. This is standing where the house once was, and I still can picture it. I just stand there, and the brush is practically up to where the house was, and I try to look and remember this is what was there. This is when the shock came. One January in 2016, I had a friend visiting from Canada, and I said, let's go up and see the old place. And I drove up, and there was nothing there, flat. I can't tell you, someplace that I've been going all my life. I'll never forget the wrench in my stomach when I saw that view. Because I didn't know that it had been taken down. So my family comes up later that spring, and we walk around and try to picture where it was. All of them had spent really a lot of time here. This is this is Leif and Debbie standing where the large living room, dining room used to be. Just such an empty space. Now looking up where it once was from down below, picturing the porch, and that flat space up there at the top is where that porch was recently and long ago. Only the garage is left. I can still see the display of early license plates, family license plates that was on the rafters of this garage. Has anyone else ever done that in their homes, put old license plates? I still have those in a box in my garage. I keep telling Brian he should put them up in his rafters. We never got them up on ours. And then somehow this sign got pulled around from the far side of the garage. I didn't know it was there until somebody pulled it around. And this is my daughter Debbie standing by the old sign for her father's shop in Old Avon Village, and I designed that sign. It had a Viking ship on it at one time, and Leif Kalquist Inc. And did anyone ever remember going to Leif Kalquist? It was a clothing store in Old Avon Village back in the 60s and 70s. But anyway, the old sign is still there, falling apart. And this is another memory that I have stashed in my cellar. We took it out of the house with the Basin's permission. It was the door to the closet into the laundry room. And it was a growth chart. Now you realize I come from a mathematically minded family. Mm-hmm. And my father would chart everybody's growth over the years and put their name along it, how tall they were. And there's a couple of generations of growth there on that. We used to joke with Brian, maybe he could turn it into a coffee table or something. And then, one of my second cousins, when they saw the story I'd written, reminded me of something I didn't remember because I don't have a picture of it. He said, "Do you remember the old fallout shelter? Did any of you have fallout shelters back in the 50s and 60s? Anyway, he remembered visiting it as a young boy, and my father would proudly show off the fallout shelter built in the basement under the kitchen. I do remember the small, dark, windowless space with concrete ceiling and walls, and the shelves stocked with non-perishable food and drinks. My father was always one to be prepared. I well remember his being sure we had gold coins as a backup in case the economy went into free fall. But anyway, a fallout shelter we certainly had in this dirt-floored, grungy, rock-walled basement. This is the furnace room across from it. Certainly didn't look anything like this one that I found online of this nice kind of very well put together fallout shelter. Some history I found online. Fallout shelters were part of the American culture since 1949, and they were inspired by fear of nuclear attack. And their subsequent waning and waxing and waning popularity was directly related to U.S.-Soviet relations. A fallout shelter, sometimes known as a bomb shelter, was a structure designed to allow those inside it to survive a nuclear blast and its likely aftermath of fire, radiation, and societal disruption. President Eisenhower's administration suggested keeping 7 days' worth of food and supplies. These included canned meat, high spam, peanut butter, cereals, soups, and drink mixes like Tang. Department stores would even display collections of fallout shelter foods as casually as they would stemware and handbags. Realistically, none of these precautions would have worked well. Anyway, like seeking refuge from radiation under a classroom desk in the duck and cover skill drills, residential fallout shelters ultimately served as empty and expensive illusions of safety. By the 1970s, Americans became preoccupied with the war in Vietnam, and the fallout shelter craze blended into obscurity. Well, let's get on to a cheerier note here. I have a bunch of these old Christmas cards that my grandfather sent. And there was a long note on the back of this one. This is the joys of living on Town Hill. Dear Hosmer, this is to my father. This is from one of your pictures that's on the card. You may remember trimming out some limbs to make the vista. This is keep working on broadening that view. Thanks for your letter of January 3rd, giving me the amount of my Strayfields property tax. I enclosed my check for $85.74. Times have changed. I had a comfortable run down on Sunday. Earl Barnes, with several hand shovelers, had opened up my lane. And my furnace was working all right, much to my relief. It snows every day, every few days, but my lane is open and all goes well. On January 2nd, I planned to have 3 neighbors to help eat my turkey, but I was snowed in, so sat down alone to a 12-pound turkey. Oh boy, can this really be the same place? When you visit, try to picture some of the scenes I've been showing you as you wander around. It's in the now empty space. Here we are. We had such fun times. Now our dog Bandit wanders around the former living room space, the garden long abandoned to brush. So many good memories here over the years. I hope others will enjoy spending time in this space. This is a charcoal sketch I made of this scene in 1953. You can see the stone wall is fully visible. And note the weather vane on the roof. One more technical quirk of my grandfather and his engineering mind. He had installed a bicycle hub in the ceiling of the living room and run a rod to a weather vane on the roof, connected to an arrow that swung around on the ceiling. A black dot on the ceiling indicated north. I can still picture sitting there and watching that arrow swing around on the ceiling. And here's Ellen Beadle in the parsonage garden. I'm thankful that my grandfather introduced her to Albert, leading to the creation of Strayfields. And now to another chapter, starting at G. Fox and Company in Hartford. How many of you remember G. Fox and Company? Yeah. It was, they said if you can get it anywhere, you can get it at Fox's. That includes husbands. Here we go. I was told to get, I had considered some, I had been told to get some retailing experience before going on to doing textile and clothing design, which was my major. And I chose G. Fox over the stores in New York City or Boston because I wanted to be near the family place. And it was there that I met my first husband, Leif Hallquist, who had emigrated from Sweden and was now a buyer there. One Christmas season in the early 1960s, Lego was just being introduced to this country from Denmark. And Fox's had a big display on their 11th floor toy floor. At the end of the season, they were disassembling it, and Leif was asked if he'd like to have blocks for Leif Jr., who was about 4 at the time. Well, it was not a common toy at the time, and my son was fascinated with it, and has said that it was constructing things with those blocks that led to his interest in architecture, which is what he knew he wanted to do by the time he was in 8th grade. I remember arranging to get him to take mechanical drawing in 9th grade, which wasn't usually offered until later in the high school thing, because Leif wanted to take mechanical drawing then. And I now live in one of the first houses he designed after he graduated from college. So thank you, Legos. This is my family reading the story of Strayfields, which is the book that I had made, around in the beautiful living room in the house that Leif designed. And he made it so it would seem like we were there, that we were outdoors when we were indoors, similar to my grandmother's wish for Strayfields with her adaptation of that Japanese house. So I think there's something must have transferred over from my grandmother to my son. And my husband Art died in 1995, and 3 years later Betty moved in with me. And that's what's enabled me to be able to stay on in Strayfields, which in the house, which I just love being here in New Hartford and being on the property. There's a lot of myrtle ground cover around the house, all over. And it all originated from clumps transplanted from this single bed along the outside wall of Strayfields. My mother's there standing in front of it. You can see the arrow pointing at it. My daughter and I came up, and with Mason's okay, we transplanted several trays of clumps down and planted them here and there. And I now have probably an acre of myrtle since the 30 years that was done. It just loves being there. And it's pretty maintenance-free. No lawn to mow. And here my daughter Debbie and her husband Brian stand on the site of their future house to be built in the woods next door to my house. This was December of 2019. So we have another generation coming to the old property. And this is 9 months later in the same spot. I have to tell you, Scott Hoskins does the most incredible work of excavating and landscaping and moving rocks. All the rocks that came out of the ground, which are lots, he moved into walls all along different sides of the property. It's just that if you ever want someone, if you can get him, because he's busy, but he's remarkable. Well, Strayfield has returned. Here we are at the back of Debbie's house a year ago, and it's just hard to think that this was all woods such a short time ago. The bank has grown up this year with these beautiful wild golden flowers across the whole bank at the back of their house. And here we are having dinner. And Brian said he wished Betty and Hosmer could be here to enjoy this scene and his grilled chicken. Because we look out and we think, oh my, and this was woods just a year ago. So let's look again at the old house site as it was this spring. My grandparents and my grandfather and parents would not have recognized it. And you won't recognize it either because that pond doesn't look like that right now. And do come and enjoy this lovely spot and heed the advice on the stone at the Mason and Lisa Beakley cemetery plot. Good days. Make it a good day. Making one good day after another makes a good life. So let's go to the park and visit. You can see here where the center is, and we go up Route 219, and then we have Beakley Gardens, and then beyond on top of the hill is the parsonage and the winery, and the Bell, and the Town Hill Cemetery, and down in the hollow are our houses and Creedy Pond. So anyway, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Why did they take the house down?
I don't know. They weren't, no one was using it. I mean, it had never been occupied since Mason died. And so I guess they must have just decided it was, my brother, when he heard it was down, he said, I hope they took the chestnut beams, because chestnut beams are pretty valuable. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if Dan still here. I have to ask. I don't know if Dan knows, but it was such a shock. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, would you all like to come up and have a quick walk around? It doesn't take too long to walk around. It's a beautiful day out there. If anyone would like to carpool, Dan invited me to, and please have some refreshments too. There's plenty there. Dan had said if anyone would like to carpool from his winery, there's plenty of parking up there. You wouldn't have to come all the way back down to Town Hill if you live up that way and would like to, gather with anybody that's would like to carpool up there instead. Okay.
All right, so yeah, let's just kind of head up, and you want to take them up? We'll clean up here.
Oh, sure.
I don't know, do we want to try to do a caravan? I'll take care of it.
By the way, if anybody would like to,
I'll go on the ride in your van if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I live just a little ways beyond that, but I don't want to
Yeah, no worries at all. That'd be
drive,
great.
a car with nobody in it but me.
What I'm going to do is stop recording here.